Season 3, Episode 8.
We tend to imagine that other people should come to our design world, even though, ironically, the job of UX people is to understand other people's worlds and for us to go there.
You're listening to UX Podcast, coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden.
Helping the UX community explore ideas and share knowledge for over a decade.
We are your hosts, James Royal Lawson
And Pat Axbom.
with listeners in countries and territories all over the world, from Yemen to Canada. Joel Marsh is the founder of Pegaton, a company that analyzes and also designs companies for corporate clients and investors.
He has worked with design, behavior, and business since 2003, including leadership roles in marketing, product and design, and advisory projects with some of Europe's largest private equity funds.
Joel has written 2 O'Reilly books, UX for Beginners and now UX for Business, How to Design Valuable Digital Companies. Today, we get down to business and talk about his most recent book. So Joel, I think now it's more than 10 years since you wrote UX for Beginners, and now you've written UX for Business. I'm just a bit curious, what was the journey from writing that book to writing this book? What led you here?
You could say one caused the other. For me, the journey, there was more of it before UX for Beginners as well. But UX for Beginners was born from blog posts, and the blog posts were born from actually an email newsletter that I used to send out at a digital creative agency where I worked, because the project UX was new and the project managers and non-designers got a lot of questions from clients in meetings about UX things, and they couldn't answer. So I just every Friday I would send a newsletter, but I was sending a newsletter to teach people who actually didn't care that much about design. They just needed it so they didn't look stupid in a meeting. I tried to make those emails entertaining and funny and easy, and it was sort of more entertainment than fact. But in there somewhere was information they could repeat to somebody else. And they were so popular that people from other agencies started asking if they could subscribe. And it wasn't even a newsletter. It was literally just me on Friday afternoon at the end of the day writing. So then I made blog posts based on that. And I made, then 1 million people read those blog posts. So then I got O'Reilly's attention, and that became UX for Beginners. But then that book went out and was fairly popular. And then I ended up, it either convinced a lot of people to become designers or became that step one bridge to get them into design in the first place. And that created this population of people with basic knowledge or information and no experience, who then went out and got jobs. and I love it.
So it's your fault.
It's all your fault, Joel.
And one of the best things about having a book that with an audience is that you get messages from all these people. I am a designer now because I read this book is a great thing to get every single time. But there was always a second part to those messages, which was, can you recommend another book now that I have a job and like that will tell me what to do at work? So after I got enough of these messages, it becomes user research at some point that I have solved part A of the problem, and there is still part B of the problem. So I realized eventually that there was a lot of people were walking into UX or design jobs with expectations that were different than reality, or with skills that were a good beginning, but they weren't enough to execute on the messier things that happen in real life, or the irrational requests from clients, or bosses that just want something. Everybody everybody finds it easy to understand the idea of sitting with a user and doing user research. But what am I researching? And why am I researching that? And so those questions didn't necessarily get a good answer in UX for beginners. So UX for business is kind of, or it tries to be, all these answers to what happens in real life. What do you do when you don't have enough money or time or information, or, all those things. So for me, there is kind of an arc from seed to whatever it is now.
Right. So it is actually the stage 2 book. I say stage 2. It's the further reading, you could say. But I hadn't, to be honest, from the title alone, until I started reading it, I hadn't actually realised it was for designers. I actually kind of thought it was for the business side. So, as in business looking in rather than designer looking out. So that was actually a bit of a revelation for me. I don't know if that's a criticism of the title or not. Maybe it probably is, but that was a revelation that as I read it and learned that it's it's for me as a designer.
It was definitely one of the most accessible books I've read that had business in the title, and I felt this is for me.
Good.
Yeah, that was really good.
That was the title was a debate even internally with. Between me and O'Reilly, and not because we disagreed, but debating what it should be. For the reasons you said, should it be UX for business? Should it be business for UX? Should it say anything about business or UX? Should it be design for business? Business design is a thing. Actually, there are agencies out there offering business design as a service, and it's not exactly UX, but has some things in common. But in a way, I'm kind of glad that you say that, because I have heard the opposite as well. That and I don't know, that ambiguity could also work in favor of the book too. It gets both audiences to take a look.
And traditionally, there is this friction between UX and business for some reason, and because I hear so many designers say that the business people don't really listen to me, they don't understand me. But what you're arguing, and what I really, really agree with, of course, what you're saying in your book, is that the purpose of UX is really to underpin the business, not compete with it. So why is there always a friction there? It appears to be, at least, between designers and business.
I think there is a natural, through no fault of anybody, there is a bit of ignorance on both sides about how they connect. And it's just true that, business people don't study design. And if you went to school for something like economics or finance, or if your experience is in sales, you're a user or a recipient, or you're working with the thing that has been designed. So the design is all in the past, when those people usually get their hands on it or do something with it for work. And for designers, I mean, you know as well as I do that nobody loves design and thinks it should be the number one topic more than designers. And design is its own world when we're in it. And we tend to imagine that other people should come to our design world, even though, ironically, the job of UX people is to understand other people's worlds and for us to go there. But as soon as we step into a meeting, designers want to talk about design. And when they really should be talking to the business stakeholders about business, because that's what the business stakeholders care about. And I think also that it's really easy in the world where you go to design school and you learn Figma, or whatever design tool of the moment is here. I mean, I'm sure in a year or two, when somebody listens to this, it might not be Figma, it might be an AI tool or whatever. But the education often focuses on the tool or the document you're going to make, or it's all of these output kind of things.
The deliverables. Right.
I mean, there's a practical reason why we talk about deliverables, of course, and tools. But then I think it's the focus starts being on that. Like, are you using Figma properly? Are you making this document the way it's supposed to be made? And how does your design look? How is it going to be built by the developers? Those are the conversations designers have all day, every day. And it's not about how your design connects into the pricing model, because designers don't talk about pricing models. And So we have this gap that I think just naturally exists. And but as at least for me, as I got much more senior in UX, UX becomes product, I guess, in a way, but you also live at the intersection of all these different departments. You end up in a stakeholder meeting where there's somebody from 4 or 5 different parts of the company, and you need to explain to each one of them why this design makes sense or why the product should be this. And for me at least, I started to realize that when you get up high enough in the ladder, you're designing most of the company. That everything the company does, this customer service plugs into the product, sales plugs into the product, marketing, all these things. Like changing the price can change the way that you should be designing it. So yeah, I'm not even sure I remember the original question now, but yeah, somewhere in there is the answer.
I think that is actually quite good. I mean, the follow-on question from that, of course, is that in the book, you provide a framework for designers to work on their own practical way of answering, I guess, that question.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about your framework.
And even, I think in the book, I even resist calling it a framework because there are...
Oh, sorry.
No, but just because there are so many, like, you know, for example, you go to school and you learn double diamond or whatever, and then you go to work and then you're like, where's the double diamond? And no, why isn't anybody else talking about double diamond?
You're quite right. I mean, we really have reached saturation point with frameworks, and I really should have resisted saying framework there.
No. I mean, it's a framework in the sense that it's kind of a mental model or whatever. It helps you kind of point yourself, and I was
guiding principles, I guess you could say.
Yeah, the goal was to give something like a hook to hang your work on or your thoughts on when you're doing design. So the framework in it is VDP. So it's value, diagnosis, probability. And value is the core, basic, fundamental value that you're trying to deliver both for the customer and for the business. So if we take a really easy example, like an e-commerce store, you're selling your product. Hopefully the customer wants your product. And when you sell the product, obviously the store, the company gets some money. So if we just reduce the whole company down to those basic bits that, help the customers find the product they want and then make it easy for them to pay so the company gets their money. So that's it, the value. And you can often reduce value down to a moment or a click. And in an e-commerce store, there is literally one click at the end when the value happens. So that, you click buy. Thank you for your purchase. So the concept of starting with value is to kind of figure out what is the value exactly in its basic form and when does it happen. And then you kind of work backwards from that value to figure out what people need at each step to get from zero to value. And in the beginning, when you build a prototype or just the thing that works in the most basic way, it could be rough, it can be ugly, it could be kind of inconvenient and slow, and definitely not accessible or pretty or anything like that, but it works. Then you essentially can deliver the value. And so then you can move into the next part, which is diagnostic. So diagnosis. So diagnosing is you take this whole chain of steps from zero to value and you start looking at them and diagnosing problems with them. And that's where you would do a lot of user research and things to figure out where do people get stuck, what's confusing, what do I need, does it work on this browser? There's a million things you can diagnose in that sense, and that's it. And
you use the analogy of a doctor in the book around this step in the
right. That's my favorite analogy. That is actually the way I think about it when I'm doing it. My dad was a doctor, and we had a long conversation once about what I do, and he sort of interrupted at one point and said, the way you talk about this, it feels so familiar to the way that I diagnose people when they come in. And that essentially your whole job as doing research but trying to diagnose problems is gathering symptoms. And symptoms can be a lot of things. It can be in the context, the family history. If you are a doctor and you're talking to a patient, maybe they have a history of cancer or whatever, or they come in and somebody says, I have a cough. Okay, a cough could be a lot of things. So what else do I know? Do you have a fever? Are you sore anywhere? Like, you can start pushing around in the UX world and in the business world. That might look like analytics. You might look for data about, okay, so what's happening? Do we see anything weird? When we do user interviews or give users tasks, is there something in that area that looks funny, or they get stuck? Or so you're trying to gather symptoms and find clusters of symptoms with a common cause, and the common cause is what you're trying to fix.
For me, that was extremely useful in thinking about how users express their needs. And some people think, well, UX is about just listening to those needs and satisfy them. Whereas someone might come to me and say, I need a better search engine. I'm not finding the stuff I want. Whereas that could actually be taken as a symptom, because what they actually need may be something else. They're not finding what they want, so they may not need a better search engine. We need better wording on the links, or we need a better navigation system, or things like that. So that was a way for me to understand how I had been thinking about that issue. So that was a super, super great way of understanding it as well.
Yeah, the whole self-diagnosis thing as well. That as a doctor, when you have to put up with patients that come to you and think they do know what's wrong with them.
Yeah, exactly. It also gets you out of, as a designer, it gets you away from, it's really easy if you talk to a user and they say, I need a button here so I can save this.
Yeah.
It should be a save button. I need that right here on the screen. It's really, especially more junior designers, it's very tempting to just go ahead and design a save button and put it right there without thinking about it too much, because it feels like a very concrete feature request. But if you treat that as a symptom, okay, saving for what purpose, or why here, or what made you feel like you need a save button? Because maybe that's related to this other thing I heard from a different user about wanting to edit this post. So maybe this save, somebody else is going to ask me to reorganize this. Like, this is all related to trying to manage content or something. So there might be some underlying cause that's better to talk about. There's also that, if a doctor has a patient and they come in, if the real problem might be that it burns when they pee, but that might be embarrassing to talk about. So they might come in and say, I don't feel good in my stomach. Trying to talk around it or a little bit, and they're not really getting into the problem. And that happens with users as well. If you're doing a task-based user interview and they fail the task, that some users think that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And just framing it as them failing is already a mistake. It should be, okay, we didn't make it easy enough for you to succeed. So,
yeah, and that is something we see an awful lot when doing user research, is that users take it upon themselves. They see it as but like you said, their own failure, that it's their fault something didn't work, or it's their fault they didn't find that button or that function or that thing. So you sometimes absolutely don't get straight away directly out from them the insights you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
And to get those insights, you have to be lucky, I suppose. This is when you get into design is redesign, because your second try is often luckier than the first.
Right. That's thank you. So the VDP, value diagnosis, the last one was probability, and in some ways that can be fine tuning or optimization. But it was, the example I use in the book is that the things if you have a list of 10 options in your menu down the left side of the screen, whatever option is number one at the top is going to be clicked by nature more often than the one below. So if option number 10 is actually what a lot of people are looking for, a lot of people are going to miss it because they clicked something else that sounded good earlier in the menu. Or, all funnels of everything are probability. And we talked earlier about how eye tracking heat maps are basically visual probability. It's what is the chance that this is going to be seen or used or clicked or happen.
Yeah, that was an aha moment for me, because I remember we were looking at a lot of those pictures back in the day. The vintage UXers among us will remember these images of the F pattern. But of course, that just means the F pattern, how you read a page, is that some people will actually make the effort to read the full first lines or few lines, and then they'll sort of run out of energy and just go down the page to reach the end and see where does this end. And that creates an F pattern.
Yeah.
And it hadn't struck me how related that is to probability before.
And also, I mean, you Per and I have discussed this before, because I've done the eye tracking stuff back in the day, and a lot of it is down to presentation of data, because that F pattern. I mean, it's all down to how long you consider gaze to be. I mean, if you alter the parameters to produce that picture, you produce a different picture.
Yes.
So you're manipulating the output you actually want to present with those eye tracking studies.
I think probability, when senior designers often, a lot of most of the details in a design are just details, like copywriting and things that are easy to change, and you don't spend that much time on it. But senior designers have a way of kind of latching on to one specific detail that nobody else understands why it's important, and really focusing on it. And I think probability is often the explanation. We have an intuition for it just from experience, but it's a probability thing that I know that if we do this on this page, most people are going to go right past it. And then we don't get any of the steps that happen afterwards. So that little detail actually changes a lot of probability going forward. Information architecture is full of that. Where just the way you organize pages, one extra click or a little bit more in the menu, or a little bit too much thinking, and then you lose a whole branch of the website.
Oh, this is a really interesting aspect of the design work we do, because I mean we're constantly hunting for best practice. We're constantly hunting for the answer to that design question. And what you're saying there, and maybe what we're all saying here, is that there isn't the answer.
Yeah,
there are answers, and your experience needs to help you decide which direction to go.
That's maybe a good argument for thinking of something like VDP as principles rather than a framework, because I think the principle doesn't really, the meaning of the principle doesn't really happen until you apply it to some scenario or specific condition, where it's, okay, the value thing sounds nice, but then you have to put it into a context. Where's the value now in this? And I think actually when I think seniority sounds like that often, where it's knowing how to apply things instead of following rules. Best practices are usually most common practices. They're not best. The best practice is an expert taking what matters out of that and applying it for this situation.
Right.
Yep.
I kind of want to get into this because towards the end of the book, I mean, it's so full of practical advice and these great analogies. And towards the end, you get into some personal, human-oriented content about working with others and working with yourself. What made you put that content into the book?
A lot of it was by request. These messages from, I think one of the most common questions in the design universe is, how do I convince stakeholder X to see the value in this, or that we should do this? And sometimes the designers haven't actually put a lot of value into the design. They like how it looks. They think the idea is cool, but it doesn't actually create value. And that's why it's hard to convince anybody of it. And then sometimes is sort of what I mentioned before, where we're not considering who we're talking to or who we're working with. The other side of that is that I have seen many times where people overlook sources of information that are really easy and available to them inside the company. When I say sources of information, I mean people that they just don't get or don't use because they're not thinking of that. Anytime I start a big new project, the first people I want to talk to are the sales people and the tech support people. And my question is, what are the three things you hear all the time? And often I'm 3 months ahead of where I would have been if I didn't talk to those people, just because, and they're so happy to help because nobody has ever asked them or given them an opportunity to help. So, things like this are just either low-hanging fruit or so valuable to the designer that you can't overlook it. But
I just thinking about that with the customer support kind of thing. There was one project I worked on where I couldn't get easy access quickly to that group of people. So I rang up the support myself and basically said what I'm doing. I'm needing to do a bit of research. Do you mind, well, if I ask a couple of questions? If you're lucky, they aren't really, you've got to keep it short though, because they're timed. Their calls are,
right.
They've got KPIs they've got to follow and how long the conversations need to be. So you can't kind of do a half an hour research call, but you can maybe kind of, just fire out that quick question to get some input straight away just by ringing in yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of discussion in that part of the book about kind of what's valuable with people and what's annoying with what they're going to care about. And it's all kind of tongue in cheek a little bit, because their priorities are their priorities and they're important for other reasons. But yeah, it's definitely it might be the number one question I got over all time, of just how do I talk to other stakeholders?
Yeah. And realizing that it's not about convincing, but actually helping.
Yeah, exactly. Reframing the whole thing.
On the very last page of your book, you write, "Make prototypes without asking." And I love that. It really resonated with me because it's something that I do. But it struck me then also how often it is a part of our jobs, or many people do, ask permission. People ask permission. Can I do this research? But it's part of your job. It's your job description. Why are we always asking permission?
Yeah. There are so many reasons. I mean, right away when you ask permission to do something that you're supposed to do, you also create this weird power dynamic with the manager. And, like, I'm not going to do things unless you explicitly bless me with the permission to do it. Whereas there's also an assumption that user research needs to cost money. Or so many places where I've worked, they said, okay, we're going to do a bunch of user research. Who's going to go get the gift cards? And it's like, gift cards? Just like, let's just go talk to people. So there's part of that. There's also that, especially in bigger companies, I think the machine is too big and the project management stuff is too complicated to start throwing curveballs at people that they don't want to spend time on. So I think it's the same. I make a similar point about accessibility. It's not a huge topic in this book. It's probably underrepresented. But I say that, when you're designing anything, just kind of do the accessibility stuff anyway. Don't ask for the extra time, just like bake it in. And it's something similar with prototypes or ideas. Once you have done, if you understand the value part and you've done the diagnosis part and you kind of see the problem, you know what it's made of, you know what probably would solve it, just make something. And then I think it's also really easy to sit in a meeting and talk about a prototype that works, that everybody can understand. Rather than that what you might want to do, kind of, if you get permission, please.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I think when you're asking for permission, you're asking permission for a thing. That instantly means you have to be clear about the thing.
Yeah.
So now you've created a box. You've constrained yourself. So if you're doing something that's exploratory, or you're doing research-based stuff, sometimes when you ask permission for the thing, you've eliminated the need for doing the thing, because effectively that discussion is going to pigeonhole things so tightly you aren't going to get anything useful from it. Right.
It's like when you get that question, okay, I want to build a prototype, and the question you get is, what are you going to learn from it? Like, well, yes. if I knew that, I wouldn't need to build a prototype.
Exactly.
Exactly. I mean, flicking through the book, got it in the hands in front of me now. I mean, I don't think it's difficult so far in this conversation, I think, for people to maybe appreciate the breadth of content in the book. I mean, I think there's over 300 pages, which would normally scare the hell out of me for a book, because I never go past the first couple of chapters. I know it's me. It's my fault. But every single page is basically another thing. And at first that frightened me. So 300 pages frightening, and then every single page has another topic frightening me. But it wasn't the book in the sense that caused the fear there. It was more, my word, there's so much that we need to step up and understand and deal with as designers in business environments or in organizational environments. I mean, you've created a bit of a Bible there, Joel. I know that this question is he's rolling on quite a long time. But that the whole thing of going wide and covering everything instead of going deep. I mean, how do you kind of package up the necessity of that? I mean, how do you convey that to readers or users, or not users, sorry, designers, that breadth without depth?
Right. Partly, I think that's my response to the fact that most other books focus on something. And that's certainly not a problem. That's a good thing. But I think if my book feels broad, intimidatingly broad, then you can imagine a designer 2 or 3 years into their career trying to pick from 500 books that all focus on one thing.
Yeah.
So it's, mine is 300 pages. The other ones might be 300 books.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, this is the Cliff's Notes on UX. The other part of it is that my perception of my own development is that I've been freelance a lot, and I've been at agencies some. And the thing that those two types of work have in common is that you get exposed to a lot quickly.
Yeah.
It's they are in themselves broad. And it wasn't until I had experience in a certain amount of different things that I started to actually understand what's common between them. And that, designing for UX or designing UX for one industry and another industry are only different in the details. And they're fundamentally all built on the same thing. And I kind of feel strongly that if you write a book that's, trying to teach something or like skills and stuff, that you should try to relay information that a reader can't possibly expect to get without going through the experience themselves. So that's like, okay, so I did this for a long time. Here's what I know. You start there. And then you build on that with your experience, and then hopefully tell somebody else after you're finished. But you can't, it would be 3,000 pages if you tried to go deep on each one of those things.
Yeah. And I think that's actually where I landed in after getting through my initial shock about the whole breadth of it and things. Is it's incredibly reassuring because each page is another topic and quite consumable. I could relate to things when I flick through. It's kind of, oh yeah, it's not just me, or I haven't experienced that on my own. You actually got confidence through being able to read that maybe what you're doing is right, or maybe that your problem space isn't unique, and there are ways forward, and I can go deeper somewhere if I want to.
Definitely. I had a client after I wrote this book, and we ended up laughing about it a little bit. That client found me through UX for Beginners, but during that project, there were times when something would happen in a discussion. I'd say, "Oh, this is a trap. Like if we do this, we're probably going to have this problem." That's page 195 in UX for Business. And so then it was, it also can work the other way from like the stakeholder perspective. Like this isn't a new problem. This isn't me sitting in the meeting inventing this need because I need you to say yes right now. This is like, it's so common. This is a page in this book. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, that made it really useful to be able to reference it like that. And as you say, just being able to say a page number around a topic. And now I'll be able to think, what did Joel say about this? I'll just go there. Get the fantastic summary of just concise information about what should I be thinking about around this topic. And if I need to go deeper than that, I can, of course.
WWJD, what would Joel do?
Exactly.
What would Joel do? Yeah.
So, James, you actually had the idea before that we pick a random page from the book and see what Joel has to say about it.
Okay. Should we do that? All right, then. All right, let's go. We'll do. We'll go. So, right. Right. Page 235. Now, I'm not going to expect you to remember what that one is, Joel. Well, a little bit, but no. Strategy. What kind of ecosystem do you need? And this is in the section that's called about ecosystems, apparently.
Okay. Right. That's a big one. So the
Still only 3 paragraphs. It can't be that big.
Well, it's I think eco. Yeah. So the first whole half of the book kind of goes from the simplest things I could talk about. I think it starts with buttons, and then works up to much more complicated, like helicopter view business things. So that page is about if you have more than one product or service. Or website or touch point if you're more in marketing that form an ecosystem. So those things all need to be considered as a group, not individually. So I might have used the example of Apple versus
You
Google.
do use, yes, I can tell you're reading it here. It was Apple that you use with kind of like iPhone, MacBook and loads of Apple products, yeah.
Yeah, so Apple's products clearly all work together. They share software to a high degree. I think they use a similar visual language. But from a business perspective there, you are also thinking about which of these products is, if somebody is totally new to Apple, which of these products might they use first? So if an iPhone is going to be your first Apple thing, how do we get you from iPhone to more? Or how does the iPhone work by itself? But then if you also add a MacBook to that situation, how does the ecosystem combine those two things so that they're more valuable than each one in between? Whereas Google, one way to look at Google's ecosystem is that Google search makes all the money. And really everything else Google does is about getting data for Google search in some form or another. So, I mean, it's nice as a user to know that there's lots of free products and wow, free. But they're free because they fuel this big search monster. So that's like by design and every time some product at Google is being designed and has some data underneath it, there needs to be considerations in the way the product is structured and worked and how the accounts are set up and how even if you pay for something like Gmail, how is all that set up so that it plugs into search somehow or AdWords or whatever. So yeah, that's the general topic of designing kind of the combinations of products and services.
Okay, Per, do you want to flick through and grab something?
Yeah, while you were talking, I was actually flicking through, and I stopped at a page that is titled, what's actually page 174. Cheaters gonna cheat. And I may have kind of cheated when I stumbled upon that one. I'll briefly remind you how the page ends. Your designs create incentives to behave well or badly. I love that phrase. I mean, it's so succinct, and it reminds people of why we're doing this. Yeah,
we have a lot of power when it comes to incentives. We really can, especially when you're talking about something with millions of users, that you create a little incentive to shift people over this way, and then a million people shift over that way, and you can really move things a lot. One of my earliest design jobs, I worked with a guy, and I think it's just in my nature to think about how a feature might be abused just for the sake of hygiene. So we worked on a software that was it was like an inventory software for warehouses. And the products in the warehouse, it was this massive, it's Ullared, it's famous in Sweden, this big store. It's like Walmart. But so the warehouse could have anything in it. And one of the details that we ended up arguing about in a meeting with developers was how many characters we should allow for the name of the product in the inventory software. And this is a very developer designer versus kind of conversation too. So the developers said that theoretically this could be anything. So we can't put a limit on the title of this product because we don't know what's coming. It's a very theoretical answer. And then so we argued for a long time because I said we can't have infinity characters as the title of this because eventually somebody's going to do something dumb and copy paste the whole website into that or something, and we're going to end up with 5,000 characters as the title name, and it's going to destroy the layout of the page. So let's put some limit on it that's really long, and we'll do whatever you need, 500,000 characters or something like that. And so we fought about that. And after that, the other designer that I worked with, he called that Marsh's law, that any feature will eventually be abused to its maximum abusability. And that's sort of if you extrapolate that into all other things, that's the cheater's going to cheat thing. So at some point, especially when it's social things or where you're getting users to interact with each other, you have to sit back and think, like, what's the worst thing I could do with this? And, in Twitter, because when things scale up, you do get people that do the worst things you can do. If you think about Twitter, people got abused, and like women and minorities, and they get targeted, they get much more of the bad things than other people. But when you concentrate an effort to be manipulative or abusive or just do dumb things with features, that it can mess a lot up. But you can solve that at the UX stage and just turn it off.
We can create incentives to help people behave well.
Yes.
Good one to end on.
Agreed.
Behave.
Thank you so much, Joel.
Thank you. It was very nice to be here.
I love how this is a book for helping people to truly understand what real life work is all about. And I love how Joel puts it I think it's in his preface. I write books when I see a problem that a book can solve. And here he's truly writing based on the feedback he got. And he has this section towards the end where he helps people understand, well, getting things done under less than ideal circumstances. You will be in projects where you don't have enough time, where you don't have enough money, where people are not doing the things that you want. And even though his advice is brief and concise, as it is throughout, which I kind of love about the book, it actually does prepare you into that mindset of understanding that, well, this is what work can look like as well. It's not always under those ideal circumstances that you probably expect when you're at school.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you. And I think even though the book is called UX for Business and is, as we've discussed in the interview, a collection of over 300 topics, bits of advice, it isn't necessarily just for kind of the classic business side of things. I mean, there are many of these topics. You can quite easily translate them or reframe them so that they work in public sector context or non-profit context. Yeah. I mean, you just have to think about the reframing a little bit, so that when Joel's talking about price, maybe you talk about kind of perceived value or something else, or you just switch a few words around. But I think an awful lot of the pages, the advice is thoroughly applicable to public sector or civic situations as well.
Definitely. I was getting things out of it all the time, and I'm usually in public sector, actually.
Yeah, and we know from talking to Joel over the years that he hasn't worked at all with the public sector, so as far as I'm aware. So it kind of makes completely sense that the book would be focused on his experience from the business world.
Yeah.
And he does have a lot of experience from it.
Exactly.
Recommended listening.
So a book that would pair nicely with this, based on what you just said, is a book by Sid Harrell, A Civic Technologist's Practice Guide. And I'm sure you've looked up, when did we interview Sid?
Well, that was back in episode 247. And that was 4.5 years ago, October 2020.
I remember feeling seen when I read that book.
Yeah, a lot of time for Sid.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
So, James, my wife said I should start doing lunges to stay in shape.
You start doing lunges to stay in shape?
And in all fairness, that would be a big step forward.
Oh,